スタートライブ目指せ彼方へ走ってゆけ傷だらけでもこの世界の未来は今君の手に
The man behind both the Sentai and Rider series was the renowned mangaka Shotaro Ishinomori, creator of one of the first Toku-type teams in Cyborg 009 in 1963. He helped pave the way for numerous other shows of its type, several of them being drawn by his hand, such as Kikaider, Ninja Arashi, Inazuman, Robot Detective, and Akumaiser 3. Ishinomori also penned the Legend of Zelda Link to the Past comic that was circulated in the American Nintendo Power, where it's easy to see some parallels with some of his earlier works. He kept up with his work until close to his death, having worked on titles as timeless as Astro Boy and our new focus, Kamen Rider. The first series in 1971 not only revolutionized Toei, but the Toku genre itself, with its method of transforming being the basis for most other Toku entities following. The poster rider is not only the mascot of the franchise, he's nearly ingrained into the fabric of Japanese entertainment history. The first Rider and nearly all of his 20th century successors gained their powers from some sort of surgical experiment on their body, usually taking form externally as some sort of belt. Few have done otherwise for their transformation process. The hero, who would be known as Kamen Rider 1 or Ichigo, was an experiment of the villains of the series who broke away from his imprisonment before the tests were complete. From there you can guess his motivations for going against Shocker and their other Rider experiments. At first, his transformation was triggered through passing wind through his belt turbine by riding his bike fast enough. But later, he could call it through the now classic Henshin pose sequence that his Showa successors would emulate. Hongo's motorcycle coach before his capture, Tobe Tachibana, became the advisor for not only Ichigo, but all the riders up until Stronger, being called Oyasan or Pops by them. Shortly into filming, the actor for Ichigo suffered a shattered leg while attempting a motorcycle stunt, forcing him into a hiatus from acting altogether. To fill the gap, another Wood character was introduced as another failed experiment initially used to combat Ichigo. His identity became known as Kamen Rider 2, Nigo, and he took up Ichigo's space in the battle queue. Later on, after the previous actor's recovery, he was put back into the story to round out the series alongside his compatriot. Shocker and their successors would repeat this copying tactic in creating groups of evil Shocker Riders. In the course of the season, the two riders would undergo design changes that were passed off as upgrades, and around the 50 episode mark, they stayed at the designs we know them for today. In the plot, they were said to have been purposely recaptured and strengthened before escaping again. Shocker itself was a band of former Nazis, though their true leader behind the trio of Generals Colonel Zoll, Dr. Shinigami, and Ambassador Hell was an omnipotent and seemingly immortal being known as Daishuryo, or Great Leader. Though others would become bold enough to claim otherwise, it was this enigmatic figure that was truly the mastermind behind all, or at least most, of the terrorist organizations of the Showa series. Seldom did he ever face the Riders directly, and when seemingly defeated, he would always return to present himself to them again. After Shocker's downfall, the remnants joined with another sect to become Gel Shocker under the General Black Shogun, though they would both suffer the same fate. Obligatory gear for the heroes seldom shifted beyond each rider's motorcycle, a vehicle that's been used for nearly every incarnation, though some with varying frequency. Many of them could be called via voice command and also be transformed from normal motorcycles, several times being done so along with the hero riding it. As far as abilities were concerned, before recent years, the riders themselves solely relied on martial arts for their fights. Attacks were powered-up versions of generic moves such as a Rider Chop, Rider Punch, and of course the series staple Rider Kick. Variations of the move would be used for almost all of the following warriors: Like Goranger would 4 years later, the first Kamen Rider series gained the most episodes, and until recently the most film adaptations. Some of these were retellings of the more pivotal episodes of the series. This would also be repeated a few times in subsequent series. Said 1973 sequel was direct in nature both in terms of story itself and the flagship rider with Kamen Rider V3. A young man whose parents were murdered by another syndicate called Destron begs the double riders to be made into a rider himself. Initially they refused, but after getting badly wounded in a battle with them, they were forced into doing so to save his life, using the skill of Ichigo and strength of Nigo into the third rider. As a result, the double riders stepped out of the story until later as a response to the revival of the Shocker and Gel Shocker generals. They would return with their successors in most of the other future 20th century programs. Eventually, though, they would only appear in suit. Each specific 20th century rider and others beyond it are based upon a sort of insect. The first three don suits of the grasshopper. Like the first show, another rider was introduced. A loyal follower of Destron was framed by one of his colleagues and tortured, resulting in the loss of his right arm. To continue his efforts against V3, he's changed into the somewhat unorthodox Rider-Man, what with a lack of mouthpiece and the first actual weapon given to a rider to replace his lost arm. Unlike the others, he had no henshin cry at all, but it suited his transformation sequence and form as a whole. Eventually, he learns of Destron's true intentions and joins the Rider cause. Later, he supposedly dies in action, V3 denoting him as the true fourth rider, or Yongo. He would resurface later via the manga accompaniment to the 20th century series, as well as Kamen Rider Spirits, and as a result, appear in later installments with his fellow veterans, almost all the time being the final few episodes of each show. Otherwise, little explanation was given for his revival.
仮面ライダー4号の名前を送るぞ。
The next incarnation was Kamen Rider X. Like Rider-Man, he didn't have a normal henshin call, since he set up his helmet during the sequence. Further, there was no belt involved in the transformation, something most other riders used in various ways, being the original's built-in turbines, to different pieces being put together, to power enhancements and weapon producers. In this case, it produced a shape-shifting weapon for him. Later, after another upgrade process, he used the phrase Dai Henshin. X-Rider's story again revolved around revenge, like V3. He and his father were forced into employ for the government of darkness, and eventually the target of framing. His father's dying act was making and implanting the X system into his son in order to bring him back to life, a somewhat different situation from the cyborgs that the earlier riders were. Like the two preceding shows, X had at least 2 movies, though the second in this case was more of a team-up with the last 4 riders, despite them showing up in the actual TV series in different stages. X's final foe, King Dark, would be one of the few adversaries in the franchise to be giant, though in recent years it would become much more common. However, one of the generals for the Government of Darkness, Apollo Geist, had something of a tragic backstory of his own. Being a revived suspect himself, he had to continually suck the life energy out of innocent beings in order to preserve his own life. Next in line was one of the most unusual of the franchise, Kamen Rider Amazon. Being the shortest show with 24 episodes and no appearances from his predecessors, it began airing the same year as X and ended shortly before the airing of the next series. Another series of unfortunate events leads Daisuke Yamamoto stranded in the Amazon rainforest without his parents, forcing him to become a modern-day Tarzan before his new village is destroyed by the latest crime syndicate led by Gorgas. The first leader, a 10-faced demon, and the second, led by Emperor Zero, was in search of the second of two bracelets. A shaman combines his knowledge of medical science and magic to turn Daisuke into the Amazon Rider using that one. By the end of the series, Daisuke retrieved the second bracelet and added it to his own power. Again, there was no traditional Henshin Cry or belt, despite Daisuke using a utility belt both in and out of suit, but that doesn't begin to even start explaining the oddities of the show. Not only is he not a cyborg, but the non-insect design of the suit has actually become under fan debate as to what it actually is trying to resemble. Some design traits lead to Komodo dragons, piranhas, or even chameleons. Amazon was also much more violent than other riders, as well as the effects. Hero and villain alike spewing blood like fluid constantly. This all despite having no weapon like Rider-Man and X, sometimes almost paradoxically being able to bite his foes through his mask, a trait also shared by only a select few heroes. Lastly was a sort of rival monster that appeared early in the series. Amazon took pity on him when he was sentenced to death by Gorgas, and eventually fights with Amazon before dying in battle, Amazon paying his respects.
Stronger.
運がよ違うよ人が呼ぶ悪を倒せと俺を呼ぶ俺は正義の戦士仮面ライダーストローガー
1975 introduced Kamen Rider Stronger. Faced with the death of another close friend, the new hero joins the Black Satan organization with the intent of revenge against them. After undergoing his surgery, he escapes, and takes on his new form to battle them. His girlfriend escaped with him, able to transform into another type of hero from the get-go. Though she was the first female hero of the franchise, she wasn't officially recognized as a rider even after her death, which was compared to that of Rider-Man. This was explained to an extent in Kamen Rider Spirits because she was never truly put through the same pain and anguish to join the riders as others. Being a true rider meant bearing both a gift and a curse. Stronger was the first Kabuto beetle-themed rider, a specific insect that would be used in many following shows in different franchises. Almost as many times along the Kuwagata stag beetle. Stronger's battle phrase that he shouted before fighting is a rarity of the franchise. He was the first to have a true power-up form at his disposal after Tackle's demise. His predecessors had similar powers, but none of them garnered an actual visual change in the uniform in mid-battle. Stronger was originally written as the final series. The TV specials presented as the true last time we would see the Riders or Tachibana. In the end, technically neither would be true, though the latter of which was only through the first movies. Introduced via another TV clip show in 1979, Kamen Rider was revived with a new show under the original title. The hero simply went by Kamen Rider since, in its beginning stages, it was originally meant to reboot the franchise with a new Ichigo, similar to what Toho did with Godzilla. But as the show progressed, it became increasingly evident that they changed their plans. Veteran riders started to appear intermittently throughout the season, giving him the name Sky Rider, due to his newfound ability to fly, an ability perhaps slightly inspired by the original Goranger Sentai. The plot of the new show was similarly scaled back in complexity, right down to the crime organization of Neo Shocker. Through another use of enemy technology being implanted into him, Sky Rider was the strongest yet, later being put through a test of surviving the rider kicks of his predecessors in order to give him a permanent suit upgrade. Even early on, the specific Henshin sequence was brought back through the system on the belt powered by wind. In a way similar to Amazon, he had a parody sidekick called Gangangi. In the following year, the seventh show in the franchise was Kamen Rider Super 1. Undergoing his surgery in the United States to become an upgraded version of an astronaut, he then trained in Japan after the scientists responsible were killed. Using different gloves in a manner similar to Rider Man, he eventually thwarted the deeds of both incarnations of Dogma, and ventures into space as he intended. Unlike other series where the evil mastermind revealed themselves later in the story, sometimes in the ending stages, the leader of Gene Dogma was apparent from the start. Super 1 was the first to have two bikes, unlike past riders, who only upgraded their existing hardware. Super 1's movie was the only time where the riders helped the flagship rider. After this, the series took another long hiatus from television.
Kamen Rider Super 1.
4 years after the airing of Super 1, the only piece of Kamen Rider material made was a short TV special called Birth of the 10th Kamen Riders All Together, or simply known as Kamen Rider ZX. As the name suggests, it introduces the 10th rider, under the acronym ZX, though his actual name was Zekros. Shot down from a plane with his sister, the Bodon Empire does away with the girl and wipes Ryo's memory clean before infusing him with the Zekros system. Bodon was led by a cousin of Shocker's Ambassador Hell, called Ambassador Darkness, but later Daishudio would again reveal himself briefly as the mastermind.
Kamen Rider yo, Sarama ja.
ゼブロス、君に我々9人はつけられる。ゼブロス、君は我々の仲間、仮面ライダー10号だ。おめでとう、仮面ライダー10号。俺は仮面ライダー10号。
Eventually, the 9 other riders force him to come to his senses through a little clip show, literally introducing themselves to Zekros. Being given the title of Jugo, the only other appearances for the Longhorn was in the next TV special. Strangely, Spirits gave an entirely different backstory for Zekros and Bodon. At the time, Zekros was planned to become another series, but it simply didn't come to fruition.
を光らす野獣のように燃えろ燃えろ燃えろ燃えろ燃えろ燃えろ燃えろライダー Endless fight Endless fight
仮面ライド
3 years after the TV movie, a new series finally appeared in the form of Kamen Rider Black, first introduced through a documentary. Stepbrothers, one born during a solar eclipse, are given the names Black Sun and Shadow Moon when captured by Gorgon. The father of the two boys is able to save one during the mind-altering process, but not the other. The spared child lives to become the next rider, while the other succumbs to tests and turns into the first truly evil rider using his given moniker of Shadow Moon. Black was the first rider to not wear a scarf, and strangely, Gorgon had no grunt soldiers to battle. Another oddity was that one of Black's bikes could talk. Gorgon and their eventual successor was the only real group of villains that wasn't a domestic terrorist organization. The plot surrounding their rivalry formed the basis for the show's largest following, one of, if not the biggest of the Showa era. So much so that it spawned the most direct sequel of the franchise seen in the next year. This was presented via a TV special in between the end of Black and the beginning of RX, the only time the original Black fought with the other riders. Another syndicate replaced Gorgon after the Kingstone that powered Black became damaged, resulting in his evolution to Black RX. Both Black and RX had several video and TV specials, one being a 3D movie which split up RX into his 3 different forms alongside the original Black. Bio Rider and Robo Rider were the first true alternate rider forms ever issued since the Charged Up Stronger. Shadow Moon made his return and was defeated for the real last time, showing his redemption before succumbing to his wounds. RX would be one of the only riders in history to have a car as part of his gear. Although no mention of Daishuryo was made throughout Black or RX, it's speculated amongst the fanbase that the final adversary in RX is his final form and his ultimate demise. This was supplemented by the fact that he had the same voiceover as Daishuryo. However, this also brought ultimately the end for the Showa era riders. Opinions of RX weren't quite as high as that of Black, and after the series finished in early 1989, Kamen Rider wouldn't grace the small screen for over a decade. Six years later, after the boom Power Rangers created across the Pacific, Saban sought to introduce the most recent version of Kamen Rider, translating it down to simply Master Rider. While the overall story went unchanged aside from the alien background and other added characters, the same feel simply wasn't there. The appearance of the past riders was kept in for the episode that was meant to be the finale, even though it was aired out of order. However, most of the riders were misnamed, and some weren't even given a name at all. Attempt after attempt was made to keep Kamen Rider alive before its next true return. In 1992, a direct-to-video production called Shin Prologue brought us a rider fans definitely didn't recognize. A man who wished to ingest a chemical for the good of science found out that he was now a genetic experiment, which made for a grotesque transformation sequence into a grasshopper hybrid called Kamen Rider Shin, usually just called Shin, some say, because of his lack of a belt or motorcycle completely. Whatever he was called, the purpose of the video was a failed attempt at grabbing the attention of the now adult fans of the franchise they cherished. However, its overly depressing and surprisingly violent content dashed Toei's plans at the time for a sequel for it. It did, however, receive some praise for being the closest to the original vision that Ishinomori had planned for the hero. Following the failure that was Shin, A duo of theatrical releases were made in 1993 and 1994 with Kamen Rider ZO, or ZO, and Kamen Rider J, respectively. Like Ichigo and Nico before them, their designs were close to identical, and their powers reminiscent of the original duo. While ZO's backstory was similar to the other Showa riders, J was similar to X, being brought back from the dead by Earth spirits. Both, like Black, combated groups of aliens, ZO fighting the Shadow Moon-esque anti-rider Doros. Whether it was intentional or not, it led, in more ways than one, to a short special aired aside Super Sentai World, obviously named Kamen Rider World, teaming the two up against a strangely revived Shadow Moon. The evil rider would grow giant, forcing Jay to do the same, a rarity for the franchise that Jay had previously done in his own movie. Shadow Moon was again vanquished, but the life of the franchise was still quite uncertain. A few years later, another direct-to-video special was released called Ultraman vs. Kamen Rider, a short what-if scenario involving Ichigo and the original Ultraman joining against another giant threat, Ichigo being the second and technically so far the last rider to grow giant. The video served as a sort of nostalgic look at the series, the beginning and ending showing children playing with action figures of the two icons, and all the sound effects and voice clips were reused from prior installments. Other small features would be made in various forms for many of the past and current Rider series, from numerous parodies like Zyber, Norida, and HG to an SD anime special, where the only production showing Tachibana with either Zekros or Black RX.
Kamen Rider Kuga.
Since the end of RX, Ishinomori continually planned an eventual return to TV for Kamen Rider. However, after going back and forth between ideas, the mangaka ultimately wouldn't live to see that day, shortly after the turn of the millennium. After an 11-year absence from the small screen, Kamen Rider rebooted while remembering in the year 2000 with Kamen Rider Kuga. Foregoing the tradition of great initial loss and scientific implants, Kuga and many of his successors would give its powers by more modern or mystic means. This was the same for the design or overall theme of the riders themselves, more often than not breaking away from their traditional bag of insects. As a result, even the plot lines became increasingly complex and convoluted during the Heisei Rider era. Kuga's powers were something of an evolution upon itself. Once the belt merged with its host, he called it the classic pose sequence, and most of his successors would still do the same, sometimes in tandem with their devices, but sometimes called the suit through fighting. The first time, he unlocked the suit's most basic, growing form. After that, he was able to access the main form for the rider, Mighty Form. Beyond that, there were three other forms that he could choose on the fly: Dragon, Pegasus, and Titan, each powering up to a rising state as the season continued. At first, the form shifting occurred sporadically, but eventually Yusuke could call on them by himself. Further along, Kuga was forced to evolve Mighty Form even further, creating the Amazing Mighty Form. Finally, in the finale, he was forced to call on Kuga's ultimate form at the risk of losing his sanity. Differentiation between the good and evil ultimate forms were the color of its eyes. This risk was due to the fact that Kuga itself is a Grongi, meaning Yusuke, in essence, becomes a Kaijin, a similar yet also very different concept from riders past and future. Including all the subtle changes, no single rider has been given as many individual forms as Kuga, though a couple have come close. The Heisei-era series would each have a number of movies and specials. Kuga's adversary wasn't a terrorist sect or an alien race, but a native bunch of savages called the Grongi. The leader that revived them has been debated amongst the fanbase as to whether he's also a rider due to his strange resemblance to the Kuga armor in the final battle. Kuga also started a series of short direct-to-video hyper battle videos, a tradition that Sentai would copy in later years. For the most part, they served as clip shows for the series halfway through, sometimes introducing material that could or could not permeate into the series itself. Also, the movies for Kuga's successor and onward would usually introduce content or plot material that would actually be used in the show following its release. Sentai would also use some tie-ins in that regard as well. Kuga's successor was another indirect sequel with Kamen Rider Agito, although the only real similarities as far as the plot was concerned were Agito's similar form-changing powers and the names regarding the enemies. Beyond that, Agito broke new ground in several respects. The show had a grand total of 8 different rider systems, though the V1 system wasn't officially recognized in the count. The flagship hero was chosen via mystic means similar to Kuga, transforming the same way as well. He had 3 forms to start with, the main ground form, and a flame and storm form that favored an arm of his suit. Eventually he'd be able to use all 3 at once with Trinity form. Alternatively, he could morph the suit as a whole with burning form, and evolve further into shining form to fight level-headed. Gills was reminiscent of Amazon with his organic inheritance of rider powers and animalistic traits, like biting his foes. He could also evolve into an Exceed state in times of need. The third main rider system was part of a police group, a set of man-made military systems that started with G3, and further enhanced with G3X, G3 Mild, and finally G4. As such, several different people would wear each suit, a first for the franchise. Lastly was a rider called Another Agito, who by appearance seemed to combine Agito's story with that of Gills, the end result greatly resembling Ichigo right down to the scar, so far its only use in the Heisei era since Zekros. Another Agito would later be killed in the line of duty. Agito started the long-running rivalry tradition where the second rider introduced would battle with the first. The next series started a new war with Kamen Rider Ryuki at the helm. The premise of this was set by humans forging contracts with monsters from the parallel mirror world, containing them in devices called Advent decks, filled with cards granting the power of the contracted monster. However, the enigmatic creator of the decks did so for one reason: conflict between the riders. This first great rider war would grant the winner one wish. The contractor of the Red Dragon, Ryuki, is forced into a somewhat uneasy alliance with Kamen Rider Knight. Nearly a dozen riders will be made for this war by the original creator, Kanzaki, but more would arise via original creations and the mirror world shadows of pre-existing bearers of the decks, each with their own unique backstories. Eventually, though, it would come to light as to why Kanzaki created the Rider War in order to appease the wishes of his ailing sister Yui. By the end of the series, nearly all of the riders had been killed, including Ryuki when he went to save a child before he could transform. Knight faced off with Kanzaki's personal rider, Odin, but the creator, finally adhering to his sister's wishes, allowed her to pass away in peace, killing off Odin himself. Ren was allowed his wish, but Kanzaki reset time back to before the war began, in effect, bringing each of them back to life with no memory of their time as riders. Ryuki's fellows initially numbered up to 13, an homage to the original Kamen Rider manga released the same year as the TV series. The additional two being man-made Alternative and Alternative Zero models of the same suit. Two rivals in the war, Zolda and Oja, received the most attention, due to Oja's psychotic lust for power and Zolda's extenuating life circumstances. Other riders that appeared in the TV series were Raya, Guy, Scissors, Impaler, and Tiger. Despite the sheer number, the 13 riders never actually gathered together, due to the early deaths of Raya and Scissors. The final three appeared in the two specials for the series, the movie episode Final, an alternate ending to the series, and a TV special titled 13 Riders, a special retelling of the series, also with two endings that could be chosen by the viewer. Their additional riders were Verde, Ryuga, Ryuki's mirror world self, and most notably, Fam, the first female Kamen Rider since Tackle. In subsequent series, some of the rider gear will be passed around to some extent, given the opportunity for other women to become riders, both in good and evil roles, but only for limited times. As far as alternative forms were concerned, Ryuki and Knight gained super forms in that of Survive mode. A hyper battle video for Ryuki was a little more special than others, a team-up with Agito. Going to the Mirror World, Ryuki encountered the Mirror Agito in burning form. Soon after, Knight, Zolda, and Oja appeared, though acting very much out of character like the original Showa riders even. Later, the real Agito would appear and would copy his rider kick in order to finish the battle. In the end, the entire ordeal was revealed to be a dream. The next show after Ryuki goes by many different names. Some call it 555, or Fives, or just as the name of the actual rider, Fies. Another evil corporation is trying to attempt world conquest via the next stage of human evolution, known as Orphanox. To protect the leader of that new race, the company creates numerous rider belts that can only be used by those who have Orphanox DNA within them. A former president of the company, and an Orphanox himself, steals 3 such belts and sends them to his foster children. One of them, Takami Inui, receives the Fives belt. Its code to activate the unit is 555, hence the name of the show. Its premise is similar to that of the X-Men, where there are Orphanox that either want to kill humans, act neutral, or live in harmony. The suits are based off letters of the Roman alphabet, the main 3 being Phi for Phi's, the self-named Delta, and Chi for Kaiksa. The movie for this series introduced 2 other evil pieces of gear, Saiga, whose letter of Psi possibly represented his non-Japanese nationality, and Orga, the Omega Rider. Fies also incorporated the first Kamen Rider Grunt and the Riot Troopers made by the Smart Brain Corporation. For new forms, this time around, Fies was the only recipient, gaining a mode that allowed him to run at supersonic speeds, and another power which amplified his suit output in blaster form. By the end of the series, however, the conditions for most of the Rider gears are left to speculation.
Kamen Rider
輝く勇気確かに閉じ込めて奇跡切り捨ては自分だけ
Kamen Rider Blade switched its focus from Greek evolution to undead card games. Millennia ago, 52 creatures battled for supremacy on Earth. The humans eventually won, being known as the Category 2 of Hearts. In present day, these undead were accidentally freed, and so another battle royale would start. Another organization created rider systems based upon the Joker's ability to copy other cards, or in this case, the undead. They initially picked 2 men to fight the wave of monsters. These individuals became Kamen Riders Blade and Garen, who used the aces of spades and diamonds to transform, respectively. Later on, the Joker would join the group with his own unique rider system, which was also his ticket to maintaining a human form. Otherwise, Callus's purpose was unknown. Later still, other undead would make systems, such as Lengel, which bonded itself to a high school student, and almost took over his mind. The movie for the series, Missing Ace, takes place several years after an alternate ending to the series. In it, a new trio of riders took the helm, in that of Glaive, Lance, and Lark, the latter of which being another female role. After fighting another undead outbreak, Glaive reveals himself as the White Joker, who then fights Blade and Garen. Each of the 4 main riders from the series had at least one power-up form for use. Blade and Garen could each use a Jack card to access its Jack form, and only Blade could use all the cards at once to become a King form. Callus had a similar form as King, known as Wild form, whose powers were self-explanatory. Lengel, however, when attempting to manifest King form, the undead separated from him, and in effect, he lost his powers. Missing Ace had a collection of shorts on the show that were direct tie-ins to the movie itself. The Hyper Battle video provided a clone of Kazuma, providing humorous questions as to who the real Blade was. In the finale, Kazuma also gave in to the undead like Lengel, and became another Joker in order to grant Callus his own sanity. His whereabouts now are unknown. The next series was almost not even a Kamen Rider iteration at all. The Blade was going to be called Ongeki Rider Hibiki, but close to the ending episodes of Blade, it was decided to make Hibiki the main hero of the next Kamen Rider series. The premise of the show was simple in nature, following a tribe of warriors against a redundant demon army. At the same time, a boy named Asumu was meant to learn maturity and strength by watching the riders, here called the Oni. The actual number of riders in this continuity is left to speculation due to the tribe itself and just how long they've been fighting the demons, the higher estimates being in the dozens. Even the powers for the riders were unorthodox, relying on sound and vibrations to destroy the enemy. The henshin devices reflected this, with most being tuning forks, others being whistles or small groups of strings, in tandem with the instrument that served as their main weaponry. Only the flagship rider had any power-up forms, in this case 2, with the Crimson Kurenai form and the armored Soko form. Kabuto was the 35th anniversary series, but only honored its heritage via short videos at the end of specific episodes that simultaneously advertised its movie. The plot was again somewhat simplified, and the main goal being to destroy an evil alien race of shape-shifting worms. The benevolent worms that appeared before them granted humans chosen keys called Zectors as the key to becoming the newest riders. Although, because of the persona-stealing abilities of the worms, there quickly forms conflict between the riders themselves. The theme of the riders went back to insects, as the name suggests. Kabuto favored the rhinoceros beetle like Stronger, and the second main rider for the series, Gatak, used an often paired stag beetle. Both Kabuto and Gatack utilized a hyper form, though Gatack only did so in the hyper battle video. Other riders included the Scorpion-themed Sasord, the Wasp-themed Zabi, or literally the Bee, Drake taking the form of a dragonfly, and two grasshopper riders akin to Ichigo and Nigo, being Punch and Kickhopper, actually utilizing the term rider jump for their kick attacks for the first time since many years. There also existed a Dark Kabuto sector, a mimicked version of Kabuto from another dimension. This concept copied over to the movie, serving as a sort of prequel to the series itself. 3 other Beetle riders appeared in it: Kertoros, Caucasus, and Hercus, serving as the villains for that outing. The next outing for Kamen Rider has recently started a debate amongst the fanbase for the direction that the series is taking. Regardless, it's hard to completely avoid the charm that was evident in Kamen Rider Den-O. An unlucky teen, Ryotaro Nogami, unexpectedly becomes contracted to a being called an Imagine, who more often than not appear in the real world as personifications of clumps of the sands of time. He's noticed by the staff of the time-traveling train Denliner to be a singularity point, one who can allow the Imagines to possess him. To that end, he's chosen to be the wielder of the Den-O belt in order to destroy the rogue Imagines. Though Den-O has a template platform to use on his own, Den-O's true power can be unleashed when he allows an Imagine to possess him while transformed. Theories of time and memories are scattered throughout the story, to the point where what and how things are happening become increasingly hard to comprehend, buried under the sheer amount of humor that Den-O dished out. With each new Imagine that found themselves attached to Ryotaro, another form was unlocked on the suit, but it was also added to the discord between the semi-reluctant passengers of Denliner. It was this level of character attention that brought Den-O to be the Sentai of Kamen Rider, so to speak. Like Kuga, Den-O had 4 main forms to switch between, each representing the weapon that the Imagine wielded. Momotaros used the main sword form, Urotaros had a fishing rod, Kintaros brandished an axe, and Ryutaros felt at home with a gun. After the introduction of the second rider, Zeronos, which had 3 forms and a train of its own, the movie with its evil rider Gao served as a direct tie-in to the series, and introduced wing form from the Imagine Sieg. While the additions to Den-O were being developed, the TV series continued with the horror film motif in Kamen Rider Kiva, or Kiva since it was officially anglicized with the V for whatever reason. Further, the show gave off a feel to the recent Castlevania titles, being Aria and Dawn of Sorrow, in that Kiva inherited the throne to the race of Fangaiers. His minions were several staples of the horror genre: the Wolfman Garuru, the Merman Basha, and the Frankenstein monster Daga, each of them giving Kiva another form like Den-O before him. They could also be combined similar to Climax form thereof in Dogabaki form. The second rider, Ixa, serving the video game parallel role of the Belmont family that initially opposed Kiva, not knowing of his beneficial nature. Finally, the third main rider, Saga, was the true heir that was initially denied his birthright. Kiva had another form similar to Liner form in Emperor form, and could further transform into a monstrous state, a first for the franchise.
"この体突き破り時を
angle of Kiva is that the story actually took place in two time periods, in 2008 and 1986, the latter of which is where the Ixa prototype battled the original king, who took the form of a Dark Kiva with Kivat-Bat's predecessors. Both the prototype and present-day Ixa had female users at least once, another similarity with Castlevania's line of priestesses that aided the Belmont line. The 2008 model of Ixa had two other forms to use, as well as a mecha along with Kiva, in the flagship's case being the actual base. The Hyper Battle video broke the fourth wall and allowed the child watching the show to watch as they became Kiva, showing a bonus merging of Dokabaki and Emperor forms. The movie introduced two other riders, Rei and Arc, the latter of which was giant by default, but grew larger when ascending into its higher form. As the story progressed in the show, Saga was seen as a worthy wielder of Dark Kiva, as he and Wataru destroyed the revived Bat Fangire. The season ended with two notable productions. The first was a series of streamed internet movies that Go-Onger, Kiva's superhero time-mate, also started up. Most, if not all, were purely for comedic purposes and had no bearing on their original series. The second was in the finale. Wataru's son arrived from the future, the next bearer of Kiva, and he introduced the heroes to a new enemy, a sort of promotion for the next Rider series, one that certainly was special. While this series was getting rekindled, it was fading further and further into obscurity in America. Finally, in mid-2007, it was revealed that an American producer was seeking to adapt one of the Heisei Rider series. Toei immediately suggested Ryuki because of the high amount of riders present in the series. Later that year, a pilot was released online, but the initial cast was later scrapped. It wasn't until mid-2008 that the final details were given out. The entire production, Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, would start early in 2009, adapted by 4Kids. It was obvious after a while that Dragon Knight was not your average Power Rangers clone, but rather a unique take on a somewhat old concept. Many times not even using dubbed footage at all.
Kamen Rider Decay.
Celebrating the first complete decade of the Heisei era of riders was, as the name suggests, Kamen Rider Decade. At first, the rumors surrounding it were thought to be false, but it would eventually come to pass that Decade would be a massive conglomerate of the 9 years that preceded it. It begins with a dream depicting a massive war between all the riders, including the movie-based ones, and all of them being destroyed, save for one.
Decade.
The following day, several spatial anomalies appeared, placing the world into chaos under the wrath of monsters from different worlds. Once Tsukasa Kadoya and those he lives with come across the Decade Belt, after being told of it by Wataru, one of the only links between the worlds we knew and the ones Tsukasa would travel to, being thrust into a convenient new identity each time. These sorts of fan fiction cliches were met with some amount of scorn. Each world was an alternate reality with at least somewhat alternate settings and conflicts, differences ranging from something as simple as names and ages, to truces between the good and evil forces, to new riders altogether, and so on. First finding himself in Kuga's dimension, he befriended that world's Yusuke, who follows him throughout the rest of the adventure. In the process, Tsukasa learns more about Decade's abilities, one of which being able to transform into and use the powers of the main Heisei riders, including the different forms of those that had them. Another unique power was to unlock a sort of utility or weapon form for each of his predecessors that, more often than not, Decade himself would wield. As the group passed from world to world, Tsukasa came to learn more and more about his belt and his own past, while a new rider, The End, or The End, came onto the scene. In Fize's world, he showed the viewers that he owned a more complete set of cards, that is, including the other riders and attacks thereof, but instead of transforming into them, he could summon drones of the riders that would do his bidding. While it would be revealed later that this technique included the human underneath, they weren't the actual people. If he so chose, he could suck his summon's power into his own attack. Next, they traveled to the world that The End hailed from, which proved to be something of an alternate version of the world that Blade's movie took place in. While it shed some light on The End's past, it was the least of what was on others' minds when they reached the next world, Shinkenger. The group befriended the Samurai Sentai that was airing alongside them that year, not an alternate version. The End's henshin device was stolen by an Ayakashi, and used it to transform into a monstrous version of the rider, and could summon Kaijin from previous Heisei seasons. They'd next travel to the world of Black RX, where Tsukasa would take on the appearance of a cyborg psychic from the original show, the actor for Black and RX reprising his role from over a decade ago. This world began mention of a terrorist group called Dai Shocker, responsible for all the ills that the worlds had fallen under, and Tsukasa learned that he had deeper connections to them than he could ever imagine. It's unclear where the movie for the series takes place, All Riders vs. Dai Shocker, but in it, the actors for the two main Shocker generals reprised their nearly 40-year-old roles. Kuga attained a rising state to his ultimate form, while all the other main Heisei riders as well as the Showa riders, including Shin, Zeto, and Jay, joined for a final battle that culminated against a new Shadow Moon and a revived King Dark. This was the first appearance for the newest rider, Double, and Dien was able to allow Decade to merge with Jay into a giant version of his complete form. It's debatable whether or not all or most of the riders were the real or alternate versions, since the only three we see out of suit are Amazon, Black, and Agito. The end of the journey came as predicted. The 9 alternate worlds emerged, and the riders began fighting amongst themselves before being destroyed. However, the original worlds were also at play, as we meet the original Blade and Kiva back from the first episode. But it presented more questions than answers, ending on a teaser for the second movie for the series. With Decade providing a somewhat forced look back, it's hard not to just sit and marvel at the stories that Toei has been able to create. With Double providing a nostalgic look, it's also hard not to look forward to the future.